I'd like to thank you for joining me on this backwards design seminar. Before we begin and get way down the rabbit hole, I'd like to apologize. I am doing summer strength and conditioning. I have 100 plus kids that I'm trying to roll through for a couple of hours, and I finished that about an hour and a half or so before I recorded this video. So if my voice is really raspy or it starts to go in and out, that's why. I'm not normally this hoarse or silent or quiet, be the right word. Um, so let me get this going. Let me start sharing my screen with everybody so we can see what we're doing. So, okay. I want to make sure I can see myself. Where's let's see if my Teams page is officially sort of updated, and it gives me a little bit of trouble because I used to be able to see myself, make sure that everything was perfectly fine as far as recording. I can minimize this a little bit. I'm doing it backwards now. Okay, so this presentation is about backwards design. And it's going to be a how-to. It's going to be a systematic approach on how I want y'all as my teachers and incoming staff to approach lesson planning, on how you need to develop a new way of thinking. And I'd like to begin by saying that some of this will come across as very obvious to some new staff members. If you are young and you are very flexible, or even if you're an established teacher, but you have a very open mind about things, some of this will feel very intuitive. But I need everybody either way to approach this with an open mind and be very willing to adjust and adapt if that's necessary. So we've had it wrong from the start. I fall into this category. I have no problem saying that. I think everybody has been in a department where the old lady in the picture is either the department head or some massive dinosaur lead weight on growth. I had a mentor, and I will not speak ill of him. I consider him to be a master teacher. We have had people from all over the state of Texas come and listen to him and speak to him and talk notes. He is but he is a relic. He is a classic. He is an example of this old woman, but not nearly as unapproachable. But he is very much a I am delivering content teacher. He is a lecturer. He's a master lecturer, and I think for an age group of I mean I'm 32. I think for my age group and everybody above us, I think us learning that way was in a lot of ways effective. I think it was the expectation. I think that's how our brains worked a little bit. We didn't have to be so with information. We didn't have to be entertained nearly as much. Like there was sort of an osmosis process that could occur. That is no longer true. And we have to understand that the new generation of kids that are coming up, and this is only going to become progressively more true, have to have they have to have a discovery of content. You you'll never the old adage of I have to be more entertaining than the TV or I have to be more entertaining or engaging than Snapchat. I think we have to recognize that that's a lost battle, that we're not going to be more entertaining than Snapchat, that we're not going to be able to be in a position where we can, like, we don't want to battle that. What you have to do is you have to be more engaging than Snapchat. And this is a way to do it. A lot of kids don't understand the broader picture of things. And the way our mentors taught things was very much like mine, content covering or activity based lessons where things make sense in a bubble. For activity based lessons where, okay, if I ground a wire and I plug something into a battery and there's a light in between it, I can create conductivity and a light turns on. Okay, well, what's the principle there? How is that broadly applied to something? In a microcosm of a lesson, kids can understand that, but how it fits into the bigger picture, I think, can get lost. We've been planning our education from the start, from a lesson to assessment perspective. We think to ourselves, how do we plan today's lesson? What do we want to achieve with that lesson? How are we then going to have an assignment that gauges that lesson? And then ultimately, a week down the road, what are we going to do to assess that? I think that is a backwards, let me rephrase. I think that is a problematic way of thinking. It's a problematic way of thinking. But you've been in these faculty meetings. You've heard these old women saying, that's the way we've always done it. Our scores are better than anyone else's in the area. I have sat in many faculty meetings, a department meeting with a PLC, with all the administrators there, and my mentor said, our scores are better than anybody else in the area. And he wasn't wrong. But we didn't stack up in comparison to some of the other schools in the state who were same size as ours, might have served a different demographic, but I don't believe in making excuses. If somebody else is able to achieve a 70% mastery rate, we should be achieving a 70% mastery rate. I are striving at the most to get that. I am of that opinion. So this is a systematic approach to how we achieve that. So from the start, there are 3 stages to this. This is backwards design. How do you take a lesson and how do you design it backwards? So the first thing that you have to do is we have to identify what are the desired results. What do we want the kids to know? At the end of every lesson, they should be able to walk away with a broader principle, something that fits into the scheme of what we're trying to teach them, something that they can apply to the next lesson, something that goes from point A to point B in a very clear, relevant, obvious way. I think that's something we have to know from the start. Number 2, we have to determine what acceptable evidence for them learning is. What are the products that are going to demonstrate to us what acceptable evidence is? And this is tough because this is content by content, subject by subject different. A product that's acceptable in math or even physics is not going to be acceptable in social studies or English, and we have to accept that. So there's while this can be a universally applicable lesson, a little bit of specificity and expertise on your level is going to be required for that. And then number 3, you have to plan learning experiences that are ultimately going to facilitate the creation of that product, right? That product needs to build into them understanding what your desired result was. It's a step process. We need to understand the desired results. We need to create or have an outline, a plan for what an acceptable product for the students is going to be. And then ultimately we need to have a day-to-day learning experience so that these students are engaged, they understand it, and they see what the broader picture is going to be. So let's be specific. I have been a U.S. history teacher for my entire career. I have loved every minute of it. But I will admit to you, it has been a flaw. My first few years, I did not teach this way. I taught content specific. It was let's cover the content. I admit to you, one, because my mentor did that. And because people, and I'm not fibbing, people from across the state would come to him to observe him. And he is a master storyteller. But as the years have progressed, it's become extremely obvious that this new generation of kids does not connect to storytelling and they do not retain it. They don't understand the bigger picture of things and the assignments and projects that he does along the way that I did when I first started out did not correlate well to success at a higher state level. So let me backtrack. Let me be more specific. So the teak that I chose is 4A, U.S. History 11th grade Social Studies TEKS. So it's a history, it's a readiness standard. The student understands the emergence of the United States as a world power between 1898 and 1920. The student is expected to, this is the A, explain why significant events, policies, and individuals such as the Spanish American War, U.S. expansionism, Henry Cabot Lodge, Alfred Thayer Mahan, Theodore Roosevelt, Stanford B. Cole, and missionaries moved the United States into the position of a world power. That is one teak in a pool of 7. I think it goes all the way to I. It does go all the way to I under this particular situation, and it's a lot. Like, it's a lot. As a new teacher, so some of my younger teachers, this is something that can be overwhelming. And there's multiple classes like this where the TEKs are extremely heavy, and it's a readiness standard, which means that every single one of these things will be tested, that they will pop up on the EOC, that there's no way around that this particular thing somehow is going to be tested. So we know this is a critical one. That's why I picked it. It's also something I think that everybody is fairly familiar with. There's not a whole lot of weird gray here. So let's start with the plan, but backwards. So what are our basic desired results? When I first started doing this, I'm getting ahead of myself. At its core, our desired outcome is for kids to understand how we became a world power. It's that simple. We don't have to overcomplicate this. Everything else are the steps in how we got there. So we need to identify what those steps and who those players were. You have to break down the TEK, right? We have to break down 4A, and we've decided that very clearly. How did we become a world power? Who influenced us to get there? It's very simple. That's the ultimate goal. So now, in step 2, we're still going backwards. We have to move to a place where kids can produce a product that shows us, right, that they're going that direction. I also want to be very clear when I say this. I'm going to mention the EOC a bunch. I'm going to speak about STAR and those courses. I don't want us to get so wrapped up in that's all we're hearing. This is not design something backwards to accommodate the EOC. I think the EOC's learning to take the test is something, it's a reality. We have to deal with it. But it's not the only reality. And lots of times kids actually understanding the content at a much deeper level will produce significantly better STAR results, even if you don't cater to the STAR test. I think that's a universal truth. So how are we going to judge their understanding? I have this asterisk. I have this underlined. Number 1, I think, is extremely powerful. Do they even know what a world power is? We've identified what the primary target is. So we need to assume nothing about it. So I think one of the first things that kids need to do in order to produce a product that they know what a world power is. This can be in some type of an acting scenario. This could be a simple, I hate knowledge-based small questions, but it can very easily be some type of basic definition. You have to assume this. When I first got into teaching, I am ashamed to admit this. I assumed that my juniors understood that we were a superpower. I assumed that my juniors understood that there was a hierarchy of countries within the world, far more than just this condescending notion of certain countries being third world and then us being first world. Like that, it's a weird thing to have assumed, but as I've gotten better, I realize now that kids don't know what that is. That's the first thing. You have to create something. It can be vocabulary. It can be newspaper articles. It can be a simple essay about saying what is a world power, how and why are we there. not necessarily as it relates to this content, but what are we doing as a world power might be a better way to look at it. I think that's what we need to do. Number two, actual products at the end of this that can help us assess what we know, like products that are given across the whole picture. In my opinion, I am a research and an essay focused teacher. I don't have to be. My STAR test does not have writing on it yet. There's rumors that it will, and there's rumors that those are changing, but I don't have it yet. But in my opinion, that's one of the best ways. It's a foundational skill. It's an educational skill that has to be had. Uh, so here's what I would suggest we do. I would have some sort of a research project based on alpha. I would highlight three of the biggest names or events within that original teak. So Alfred Thayer Mahan, Teddy Roosevelt, and the Spanish American War. Those are the three really big things that correlate from that teak. You could add in missionaries, of course, depending on your lens and if you had time. But I would make the kids do some type of research project explaining what those events, what was the cause and effect that those events had on our rise to a world power. I would do that. I will also say that it's possible that you could do a standard star formatted test done on a computer, because that's how all kids are going to take it nowadays. And that's something you can do. For EOC courses, I think you have to leave that as an option. I recognize that it is not the most engaging thing, but I also say that it's the world we live in. So data that it can be shared through DMAC and evaluated in a much more consistent standard way is not necessarily an evil thing. Or you could do some type of research project, not essay based, on any of the key players or issues. It's also possible you could give the kids a research paper option and some type of presentation project. Allow for differentiation. You should have kids who are maybe they acknowledge they're not good writers. They're going to have to write some in a presentation, but they need to be able to give some sort of accurate description of that content. I think that's necessary. And then there has to be a way of judging that. Kids reading off a slideshow tells you that they copy and pasted things. If they can't get up in front of a group of people and speak with a manner of confidence, you know they're not confident about what they have. They didn't learn it. You have to know that. Research essays, I recommend having everybody turn it in, or use your best judgment and help sniff out plagiarism. Kids are notorious for doing things the night before, and plagiarism is all too easy these days. You have to build in time to show them what plagiarism is. If you do the research project, you have to build in time to show them how to cite sources, all of which are good things. Should not be viewed as negative things. That's my 2 cents. And lastly, we've arrived. So be engaging. So now, to make sure we're following in our steps, we have the end in mind. We know what we want the kids to learn. We now have a way of saying this is what we're going to do to assess that knowledge. Now we have to create a day-to-day schedule throughout that time that gets us to that point. And I will stress this. You have to be engaging. We have to get the kids talking. You have to get the kids communicating. They have to feel that it's relevant to them. They have to have a connection to the content that's bigger than just passive. It's just passive, right? We can't, this content delivery, this isn't the 1980s where you can just stand and deliver anymore. It's time to get the kids involved. So these experiences that you create have to get the kids on board and ready to go, and you need to make it fun. I have to stress this enough. You need to make it fun. I would do, when I've done the Spanish American War several times. Oh, obviously my entire career. But one of the things that I always like to show kids is I want to say, write a perspective of the San Juan Hill charge from somebody not named Teddy Roosevelt. And it seems goofy, but it gets the kids researching into people that were there. And they find out very quickly And if you've been paying attention to this slideshow, you've seen different pieces of propaganda in the background. Teddy Roosevelt was hailed as a major hero for the charge on San Juan Hill. But it blows the kids' minds when they found out that the 10th Black Cavalry was sent before them. And they realistically cleared the hill long before the Rough Riders made the charge. Usually the kids find that fascinating, but it gets them engaged. And then they have to write from that perspective and what it was like to not get any real good piece of history. It's just an option. For your math or your English or science, although this is specific to this TEAC, you can easily see how these principles can be applied. So in conclusion, you have to identify the desired results first. What do you want the kids to know? Number two, you have to determine what is acceptable evidence. What do we want the product to look like? How do we want them to prove they know what they're doing? And then number three, plan learning experiences that are engaging, relevant, and fun, all of your kids. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time for this video. I think I went a little over time, but I think it's going to serve its purpose as well. If there's any questions, I'd please invite you to email me. If there's something you feel like I've missed, the same, please reach out. Thank you again.